Everyone, I'm Sean Callebs reporting live from Wilmington, North Carolina, as Hurricane Florence begins to really have its effects felt on this area. A few things about this storm. It is a massive storm, firstly, and it is also moving extremely slowly. There are millions of people who have been evacuated. There are massive concerns about widespread flooding that could cause billions of dollars in damage, and officials with federal, state, local governments have all been very clear that this is not a storm to be taken lightly. They fully expect this is the kind of storm that can bring the loss of life. It's impossible to overstate just how concerned authorities are about Hurricane Florence. Firstly, let's talk a bit about its size and the way it moved in to this region. At one point yesterday, it was a Category 4 hurricane. That is the second most powerful hurricane on measurement, but its winds dropped down somewhat significantly. Right now, it is only expected to be a Category 2 hurricane, but I can tell you the wind is blowing strong enough that the rain actually stings now as it hits my face. But even though it's losing a bit of wind power, it is growing in size and now extends down south into South Carolina and is threatening to go into Virginia as well. I want to show you over here just a bit. It's going to be very difficult to see right now at this hour, but right down there is the Cape Fear River, and it has been rising steadily throughout the day. Authorities are concerned that this counterclockwise spin can come in as the storm surge comes and blow all this water back up and then cause widespread flooding where we are right now. We fully expect this boardwalk where I'm standing on right now is going to be completely swamped within a matter of time. The storm is moving so slowly. Yesterday at this time, authorities thought the teeth of the storm, the worst part of the storm, would be hitting this area. It's simply not happening. It's moving so slowly. The winds are still gusting. It's not hurricane force winds. We're several kilometers in from the coastline. Yesterday we were on a barrier island, the kind of thing that is just going to get swamped. Let's talk about that storm surge that's going to come with the storm. They're talking somewhere between 4, possibly even 5 meters. Okay, so I'm 2 meters tall, so it's going to be twice as tall as I am. So you can imagine it's going to hit the second floor of houses. It's going to cause all kinds of devastation. Secondly, the hurricane force winds, usually a hurricane, once it makes landfall, it moves in very quickly. This one isn't going to do that. Florence is going to sit over an area and just dump lots of rainfall on the area. So the hurricane force winds will be hitting buildings for a significant amount of time. It's going to be a lot longer than your average hurricane. So even though many buildings were built to withstand winds of somewhere of hurricane strength, 200 kilometers an hour, it's going to be a lot worse. So it's going to be very difficult to see if any of these buildings are going to be able to withstand it. And where we are right now is a very low-lying area. If we would stand out here throughout the storm, obviously we would be in a great deal of danger, but we're actually staying at this hotel right here, and we're going to be able to go up into there throughout the night, and then tomorrow there's higher ground on the other side, so we'll be able to report safely from there. But there are millions of people who have been evacuated, and anyone who did not heed the warning, it may be too late to go out right now. Emergency authorities have said time and time again that if people wait too long and then make the call that they need assistance, it's going to be impossible for the authorities to get to them. So those folks are simply on their own. That's one thing that we have heard repeatedly from the authorities. And also, there's been a great deal of discussion about climate change. What aspect of climate change is playing into all these violent storms that have really hit the world this year? Let's take a look at some of the weather. The fires that have been out west in the United States, the smoke has blown all the way across, been seen in the Midwestern states of the U.S. There have been fires in Greece that have claimed dozens of lives, fires in Sweden. There's been massive flooding in the south part of China as well as Vietnam, and India went through some very violent monsoons as well. Massive drought in parts of Africa, including South Africa, that is suffering through a historic drought. Now, just this past week, the UN Secretary General had an important speech on climate change and talked about perhaps it is the greatest threat that the Earth is facing right now. And he believes that climate change has a great deal to do with all these violent storms. He's calling for world leaders to step up and find a way to tackle all of these challenges. It was just 3 years ago that President Xi Jinping and then President Barack Obama led nations around the world to sign the historic climate peace accord in Paris. At that time, there was so much hope. The goal was to keep global temperatures from rising more than 2 degrees centigrade in the next a couple of decades, and that's going to be important since the Industrial Revolution, and that's going to be important if they're going to try and keep temperatures under control and keep storms and global climate change from getting out of control. But the U.S. famously pulled out of that agreement. Virtually every other nation on Earth has agreed to it. And secondly, the United States and a number of other wealthy nations were supposed to contribute to a fund, something like $100 billion, to help developing nations wean themselves off of fossil fuels and come up with renewable energy, whether it be wind or solar. Well, Donald Trump isn't going to pay into that fund anymore, and the fund is grossly underfunded at this time. So there's a great deal of concern that these developing countries are just going to simply have to depend on coal and other oil and other fossil fuels, and that certainly isn't going to help the effort to keep carbon dioxide out of the air, keep greenhouse gases from building up, and fuel global warming. But once again, let's talk about where we are right now. We are in Wilmington, North Carolina. We'll walk down this way just a bit, show you a little more about this boardwalk. Wilmington, North Carolina is one area that is basically right in the path of the storm. The eye of the hurricane is expected to pass over sometime, perhaps even mid-morning. That's how slow the storm is moving. The winds are going somewhere around 170 to 200 kilometers per hour. You guys can go ahead. It's fine. We've got other folks out here working as well. The only people out in this weather right now. Do you care if we get a shot of you real quick here just to show people what's going on? Just the media, but the only people out in this weather. Many of the media are staying at this hotel where we are right now, kind of trying to ride out the storm, and the live shots come virtually around the clock, so people come out and do their live shots, try to update folks. But again, here on this boardwalk, we fully expect it to get swamped by this storm. It is expected to bring anywhere from 40, 50, even 60 centimeters of rainfall. That is going to cause massive flooding throughout this area. And not just in the coastal areas. As the storm surge pushes up these rivers, you're going to see flooding throughout the tentacles of the rivers and the streams throughout the Carolinas. South Carolina has declared a state of emergency, as 4 other states have as well. And again, the major concern is the loss of life. But we know this is going to be a costly storm too. There are some U.S. authorities who believe that this could be the most costly hurricane in U.S. history. So much is at stake? First, there are a lot of crops. It's late in the season. The number 1 and number 3 tobacco growing crops in the United States are North Carolina and Virginia. And these areas are going to be inundated with rain, the widespread flooding. It could destroy crops. Secondly, a lot of livestock, especially pork. Hogs. North Carolina is the number 1 pork producer in the United States, so farmers are trying to get all the livestock out of harm's way as quickly as possible. But they're also leaving behind a major concern because they keep manure and other chemicals on the site. So once these farms begin to flood, all of that is going to pour into these rivers and into the other byways. And then once the water does settle, all these harmful elements are going to be dropped in communities as well. So people are worried about environmental degradation from this storm as well. But this is the storm that's going to stick with this area for such a long time. People have been warning residents throughout the Carolinas and parts of Virginia that this storm is coming and that they need to take heed and get out of the way of it. But after hearing it for 72 hours, some people believe, well, maybe it's not going to be as bad as authorities say. So there's some people who've indicated that they're going to try to ride out the storm, try to do as best they can through this situation. Right now, it's not going to be that difficult because the rain is not coming down in such a dramatic fashion. I'll take you down here to the river and give you an idea of what's going on. I'm going to have to ask our photographer, Peter Stoles, to be extremely careful going down here. This is an area where boats routinely pull up and fuel, but right now, obviously there are no boats. Everybody's gotten the boats out of the area as quickly as possible to make sure that they don't tip, go over. We saw that happen a great deal leading up to this storm. So now you can see just a little bit about the Cape Fear River. Sort of white caps, and it's moving very rapidly right now as it moves down. This dock that we're on right now is actually a floating dock too. You can see there are connectors around these poles, so as the water goes up, so does this dock. But at some point, it's going to be up so far that it's just going to be completely overwhelmed by the water. And again, let's talk about these hurricane force winds that are coming in. Winds 170, 180 kilometers perhaps. Homes were built to withstand that here in the coastal area of the United States. That really changed after Hurricane Andrew back in 1990, I believe, is when that storm hit. It did so much devastation to the southern part of Florida that they changed building codes and made structures, they had to be built in a much more strenuous fashion. So you can tell when a hurricane goes through an area that hasn't hit in a long time, the homes that were built before Andrew and those after, because those homes are able to ride it out. But nothing is going to be able to withstand this storm surge if authorities are right. 4 to 5 meters. 2 stories tall. As the water goes in, it could simply blow in, and then as it comes back out, suck all that debris back out. We've seen that before. It happened during Hurricane Katrina along the Mississippi coast. It claimed so many lives. We saw it last year in Hurricane Harvey in the heart of Houston. Areas that weren't even in floodplains were completely underwater. So that's the concern for areas here. People don't know what areas could flood. Obviously, the low-lying areas are the ones that are more precarious, but there are other areas that are at risk, and people may not have flood insurance. Again, that's going to add up to how costly this is. This is going to take a bite out of the U.S. economy, but there are some companies that are actually going to do well at a time like this, things like the Home Depot and Lowe's. These are sort of do-it-yourself stores that sell plywood, lumber, nails, and people are going to be needing that a great deal after this storm. Well, right now, it's not nearly as bad as it's going to get. It's going to be a very anxious evening for the people here in the Carolinas. They expect winds to pick up. They expect this rain to really start pummeling the Carolinas. And now that it has started, it isn't going to stop. We'll update you when the situation warrants it, but it is a very dangerous storm and one that is going to haunt this part of the United States, one that could be historic proportions. Sean Callebs, CGTN Live in Wilmington, North Carolina.